So I would like to present two presentations. The first one really connects a little bit what we discussed yesterday about justice. So the question here is of how to provide equitable access to power, especially for... The question that I would like to explore is how do we provide equitable access to power in the rural areas, and going beyond that, and also give a share of the benefits arising from renewable energy generation to the local villages. So the project that I'm presenting is titled the Solar Village Project. That's an initiative that is already 6 years old and has been moving very slow. It was funded by the Tamil Nadu Innovation Initiative by the State Planning Commission, has been made a joint R&D project between Tancheco and TEDA. And currently we have a pilot project in the pipeline in a village called Irrigation. So and apart from that one, we also are looking at how can we take it beyond the government. Could I request people in the audience to not talk? It's very difficult for me, and I guess also for the rest in the audience to listen. Yeah? So the initiative here looks at could we solarize 100 villages in 2030, and how do we go about it, and what would be the financial mechanism to make this happen? Just a few of the issues, and there are of course more. Why are we looking at that one? Everybody from Tamil Nadu, you may remember that a few years ago we had a lot of power outages. We still have, and power outages are more predominant in the rural areas than they are in urban. So obviously there is an equality in terms of power supply. Rural feeders are treated very often as a dump load. They get electricity when there is surplus electricity. They have no power supply when there is a shortage of power supply. So that's the issue of power outages. Global warming we have discussed enough, so I don't go into the details of that. Water stress also was discussed already. So Tamil Nadu has been declared as an extreme water stress state in India. And we know that water goes into energy, but also a lot of water is extracted in agriculture. Social barriers, and that's a tricky issue, especially for somebody that is not from the country. But we have a lot of socially constructed barriers about caste, religion, and castes. And the Solar Village tries to see whether we have a leverage in at least addressing those issues as well. Yeah, and lastly, ownership concentration of renewable power generations. Today, most of the renewable energy systems, utility scaled, are owned by the big corporates, and there's very little to no benefits to the villages, for example. So what, and I keep it very simple. So what we are trying to do is, I said 100 villages, 100 megawatt of solar. We are looking at distributed generation where the solar systems are connected to the existing electrical infrastructure at the village level, which means there is no extra investment required for evacuation infrastructure. It would also have some benefits in stabilizing the voltage at the grid if you feed it from the grid tail end. We are looking at, it has been mentioned before, co-utilization of the land for agriculture, crops, solar crops, and eventually even for rainwater management and harvesting. CO2 emission reduction, it's obvious, and the financial or the metering mechanism would be cross-export. Every unit of solar energy is being exported, sold to a third party. That would be the preferred option, or the state utility. The village continues to pay electricity tariffs subsidized as they do today. There would be no change for them in terms of payment. The benefit the village would have is a 24/7 power supply, since the Electricity Act of India stipulates that as soon as there is a renewable energy generator connected to the feeder would need to be declared as a 24/7 feeder. That means 24/7 power supply. So that's the leverage point we are trying to use to provide 24/7 power to the village. We also know that having power outages in the villages compromises on the economic performance of the village. So 100 villages, we are looking at working with self-help groups where they would get a 10% revenue share from the net revenue that comes in from the solar energy generation. 90% would be used in a revolving fund where we can then reinvest into additional villages. We would like to do participatory budgeting at the village level so that the villages with the self-help groups could decide of how to best utilize the 10% revenue sharing they get. And then address village level issues like in waste management or street lighting or water supply or whatever they would like to address. And of course awareness creation needs to get along with it as people are conscious of how to use energy. This is a little bit of a diagram that summarizes what we are trying to do. So financing, we have different options of financing. One is the revolving fund, where from the sales of electricity we would have revenue coming back in. The second one is we are currently working on an incentivized search engine. Everybody of you knows Google, right? So there is, globally there is a few search engines that raise money for a cause. So we have developed a search engine that hopefully will be launched by December that would generate revenue that we then can use again for the Solar Village Fund. We are also looking for grants and donations, and it has been very hard because right now we are supposed to start with a 1 megawatt system because of the current policy framework in Tamil Nadu. I cannot go below 1 megawatt. And of course on the long run we are also looking at social impact investments for the financing option. Now, solar energy itself, I said, it's a community system. It's connected to the village level distribution grid. And yeah, it's carbon neutral, and we also want to create local employment. So local employment primarily for operation and maintenance of the system. As mentioned, the sales from electricity, 90% goes into the fund, 10% goes to the village, where we then do village participation, participatory planning and implementation. And finally, what we want to see is vibrant village communities. And we want to look at the nexus of energy, water, food, and livelihood security in the village itself. This is the dream, this is the target. So we require to have a 3 megawatt, ideally from grants or donation, to get started. And that would enable us to reach 100 megawatt in about 12 years with the funding mechanisms that I have just presented, including the search engine. Now this is an image of the search engine, and to be launched on 5th of December, and everybody is invited to use it as much as possible. And this is a little bit what we need to reach. So yeah, it's supposed to generate revenue. How does it generate revenue? If you search, even with Google, your first 2 or 3 search results are sponsored advertisements. I click on it, Google gets a payment. Now instead of Google getting a payment, we are trying to get some of this payment for the solar village. Yeah, it also will help us in creating visibility on the project, and maybe that's the main benefit, not the financial one, but really that we have visibility, national and international. It creates awareness about the issue, and it will help, and we also would like to disseminate the project. It's not that we need to hold this idea by ourselves. We would like to see other people replicating the same in their respective districts or states. Now the goal is a steep one. So we are using Bing as a technology provider because currently that's the only commercial search engine that provides this option. Now they have stipulated that we need to reach 40,000 users in 3 months in order to be allowed to continue. So it's a pure marketing and dissemination exercise that we have. And if we succeed in 3 months for the 40,000, we should have about 100,000 at the end of year 1. In terms of revenue, it would generate $25,000 in the first 3 months, and we would come up to about $220,000 at the end of year 1, which is a substantial amount to be used then to solarize villages. This is a little bit about ourselves. Auroville Consulting is a non-for-profit under the Auroville Foundation. We work primarily on renewable energy on the policy segment. And the partners, Auroville Village Action Group is an NGO that works in about 100 villages around Auroville. So they would be our implementation partner to engage with the villages. We have academic partners, corporate sector. We are looking at funding agencies, and media will be critical for the dissemination. And yeah, that's how you can help. I will certainly get back to you on the 5th of December. Search as much as you can. Click on all the advertisements. Creates revenue. Promote it, and you're also invited to get involved. We are trying to expand the team with people that know about communication, programming, and finally, when we get into the implementation, engineers are required. Yeah.
In villages.
Yeah.
So, in trying to implement this, did you visit some of the existing villages which are solar microgrids and some new ones which are solar wind hybrid microgrids?
Yeah. I didn't visit, but I have been following the policies that came out. For example, Tamil Nadu doesn't have any policy yet on microgrids. Second, where I am hesitant is to get into collection of payment from the villagers, because they have subsidized electricity for especially the residential areas. I am not able to provide that with solar. So that's somehow the route that we have taken. I'm not saying we may not go a different route in a few years. I mean, in Tamil Nadu, just to add to this, the first 100 units of electricity are for free, which makes it very difficult for me to go for a microgrid. I mean, one more thing is one of the learnings I had here, because working closely with government, I have faced a series of hurdles that was unexpected, and it was a very good learning. I think that's why the emphasis is also, can we drive it by ourselves, and to be less depending on the government. Now the second one, the motivation primarily came because Tamil Nadu is planning to introduce grid-connected solar systems for the agricultural consumers. And TEDA, the state nodal agency, recently announced a request for proposal. So I took the numbers and worked them and thought, you know, what would be the impact on the farm and the farmer in terms of finances? What would be the impact on the utility? And also, what are additional options that could be considered? And I called it energy, water, land, and livelihood nexus, because I find the interaction between those different areas quite fascinating. And most of this data has been addressed already.
You have to hold it a bit.
I have to hold it, yeah.
No, it's the same one. Just
So we call it ice cream. So I'll just imagine. Yeah, in Tamil Nadu, we have about 40% of the workforce engaged in agriculture, direct or indirect. So, which is also a question of political economy, because the voting bank is huge. Second one is the economic output. We mentioned this on the GDP for Tamil Nadu. It's about 12%. Then we have landholding. Especially in Tamil Nadu, there's a lot of small and marginal farmers with the average landholding of 0.8 hectares per farm, which is quite small compared to other states. Groundwater extraction, it was mentioned that the agricultural sector, and this is an Indian statistic, not for Tamil Nadu, and I have heard slightly different figures, but about 80% of the groundwater extraction goes on account of the agricultural sector. Yeah, and the concern here is that Tamil Nadu is water stressed, and I have heard figures that the average groundwater table is minus 85% over the 10-year average. So the situation is drastic. And finally, the agricultural sector in Tamil Nadu accounts for about 20% of the electricity consumption. The challenge for the state is that this is subsidized or free electricity, and it's a heavy burden on the utility, which does not always get paid by the state for the electricity supply. I'll go through that quickly because you will all be familiar with that. So the first concern is providing a living income for the farmers. The average farmer in India, and this is a Niti Aayog statistic, is 1.2 lakhs per year for a household, a farming household. So that's very little. We had in Tamil Nadu in 2016, 382 farmer suicides. It's the lowest numbers in years. Yeah. So there is issues on economy, on livelihood related to the farmers. The second one is water scarcity. So I've discussed that already. Yeah? And with climate change coming, the water scarcity issue will increase. We will have more droughts. Food security. The first one is that about 23% of the total geographic area in Tamil Nadu is degraded land. So land that is not fit for agricultural purpose anymore. Yeah. Then the soil fertility has decreased by about half in the last 30 years. Yeah. And an estimate on the cost of soil degradation, which from the World Bank, is that it costs the state about 820 million rupees per year. Yeah. And the question, of course, is also how do we feed ourselves? So soil is degrading, we lose more and more agricultural land, water is an issue, and population is increasing. Energy and climate, we have discussed that. Just the figure here is that the free electricity supply in 2016 to agriculture costed about 7,369 crores. And there is 2.1 million agricultural pumps in Tamil Nadu, and the connected load is about 8,400 megawatts. Political economy, I said that in the past, the government has tried multiple times to introduce metering facilities for the agricultural sector for good and bad reasons, but that never came through because agriculture has a strong political representation. Unemployment, that's the last one. I Googled when I found some data, and I don't know how reliable that is, but the Department of Employment and Training listed 1.3 crores unemployed people, registered as unemployed. This is 13 million, and the state has 70 million of population, so that's a huge number. Okay. So now I would like to trail you through what I would call is the causal factors of free electricity, and it's not a complete picture. It can never be a complete picture. I am focusing only on electricity, water, land, and a little bit on livelihood. Yeah. So basically, if we supply free electricity to the farmers, definitely there is no incentive for the farmer to conserve energy or to reduce the energy consumption to install energy efficient pumps. That means the energy demand will increase. If the increase in energy demand happens, the financial burden to the state will increase. So now the financial burden increases, that means the state will give unreliable power supply to the farmers. So a lot of power shedding is happening. So right now, primarily with the farmers that I have interacted, power comes at late at night, which means the farmer installs an auto switch. The pump is always switched on. And whenever power comes, water is being pumped. And it's over pumped. Much more water is being extracted than actually required. Yeah, so installation of auto switch means over extraction of water. Now what the farmers then very often do, since they never know when power comes, is auto switches and capacitors, which again, and they go for higher pumps, higher capacity pumps, so they can pump more water in a short time, which again increases the load on the grid and the electricity consumption. And sometimes it brings an overload of the distribution transformer, which costs the utility because they need to repair or upgrade the distribution transformer. And also very often the pumps of the farmers burn out and they need to repair it. And that costs them 30,000 rupees a year. So with all of this one, we have over-extraction of groundwater. We also have over-irrigation. In India, their per capita yield is very low, but the water supplied per hectare or per crop is very high compared to other states like countries like China or Brazil. So we have a very low water use efficiency in the agricultural sector, which means that the borewells get deeper and deeper, which again costs more money, which also means that the pumps need to be bigger and bigger again. Now, if we over-irrigate, we lose soil fertility because we wash out the micronutrients from the soil. If we lose soil fertility, the farmer needs to put in more fertilizer, which means it costs more for the farmer, more input costs. Now, that also means loss in soil fertility brings more expenses to the farmer and less income for the farmer because less yield. And finally, very often, loss to livelihood, indebtedness. I think 80% of the farmers in Tamil Nadu are indebted. That's a little bit of the visual circle or the causal factors of free electricity. Now, what the state government has proposed is solar PV, grid connected, with an efficient pump. So efficient pumps could save about 30% of electricity. What I would like to explore is what I call advanced irrigation technology, which is simple micro irrigation plus a precision irrigation technology, which is an ITC-enabled technology. So the assumption here is that the advanced irrigation technology could save 45% of energy and 45% of water, which is a very conservative estimate. It also increases the yield. Typically, it increases the yield depending on the crop by 50+%. I didn't go into additionalities when I did calculations, but what would be interesting to explore is electricity storage, hydro storage, stormwater management, cropping patterns, which is a challenging question, but very often today we grow crops in areas where we do not have sufficient water to grow them in the first place. For example, rice. So in some of the areas in Tamil Nadu, traditionally millets were grown, but nobody wants to eat millets anymore. So now the market drives the farmer to grow type of crops that are very water demanding in areas where there is anyway water scarcity. So the question is cropping patterns. So I have a case study, and it's maybe not very representative for the average Tamil farmer, but it's based on the TEDA tender. So I have a banana farm of 5 acres. The cost per acre for input fertilizer is about 20,000 rupees per year. Income per acre per year is 1.2 lakhs. We have a pump of about 7 HP, an annual electricity consumption of a bit more than 14,000 kilowatt hours per year, and a cost of free electricity to the government of 85,000 rupees. And the irrigation technology deployed here is a flood irrigation. Just watching my time. Before I go into the details, so this is a little bit of an elaboration of how the state, or in this case the DISCOM, could save by deploying solar at the agricultural service connections. Now if you look at the gray line here, this is the average billing rate. And in 2016, it was something like 5.85 rupees per kilowatt hour. That's what the utility gets from the consumer on an average per unit of electricity. Assuming that this grows over the years by 5%, that's an assumption. So this would give you the gray line. Now solar, the cost is stable. If I invest into solar today and I get the unit of solar, let's say for 4.2 rupees, I have the same cost over a 20-year time period. So the gray line or the orange line here would be the cost of solar. So imagine that the delta here between the bottom axis and the gray line, this delta here would be the financial saving to the electricity utility over 20 years by applying solar energy. Now, I have done this one for this one sample farm. So this is the impact by interventions, and I'll explain the interventions on the state government and the farmer, taking a 20-year time period in percentage. Savings is the gray one, and the orange one is income in increase for the farmer. So the farmer has here 2 streams of income. If he goes for solar, in this case, he would get a 5% of revenue on the cross production and a 10% on the net export. So it's in the interest of the farmer to reduce his electricity consumption because he would have more net export of solar energy to the grid. So the first scenario is I have grid energy and I do only energy efficient pumps. 30% saving for the DISCOM, 0 income increase for the farmer. Second scenario is I have still grid electricity. I introduced advanced irrigation technology, which reduces the consumption by 45% and increases the yield for the farmer. So 45% savings for the government, about 53% increase of income for the farmer because the yield goes up. So that's a very interesting intervention because it has both. It increases the income for the farmer tremendously and reduces the cost for the state utility. Then I only looked at solar. So solar would be 77% of savings for the DISCOM and a little increase in income to the farmer. And when I calculated the increase in income, I also deducted the loss from crop production because some of the land has to be given for the solar plants. Now, if we do grid energy, energy efficiency, and advanced irrigation, we have about 61% savings for the utility, and we still have 53% saving for the farmer. Solar energy efficiency, more than 100% savings for the utility, a little increase in income for the farmer by 1.25%. Solar and advanced irrigation reduces the consumption on the farm, hence more benefits to the utility, 114% cost savings for the utility, and I have about 60% increase in income for the farmer. And the combination of all would be quite an impressive 128% savings to the utility and about 66% increase on farmers' income. Yeah. So this is for a banana crop. It will not be the same for all the crops. It will be different with vegetable crops. Now this is just taking the first year. And I don't go into all the details. I primarily want to focus on this one because I feel that's the most promising intervention. Now, here we have the solar energy production. We have cost of energy supply to the farm for the first year and the energy consumption by the farm. So the solar energy production here in kilowatt hours, I think is about 38,000 kilowatt hours of solar energy production. The consumption would go down drastically. If you see, with grid supply, the farmer would consume about 90,000 kilowatt hours. Here we are down to approximately 12,000. So it's a reduction, a factor by 8. And at the same time, the consumption and cost of energy on the farm, and the cost of energy goes down. I think we started with about 90,000, here it goes down to 10,000. So I guess the point I'm trying to make is the combination of solar, grid connected, where the farmer has a financial incentive and the utility can introduce metering, which will be critical for them at this point in time, has benefits on the livelihood, it has benefits on the production of the crops, and it has benefits for the state utility because they have tremendous savings over time. The same has been done for a 20-year period, but I would like to go to this one. Now, this is the net present value. People that are in finances will understand that. So that's basically if I have, let's say, an income every year over the next 25 years, there will be an inflation. So the question is the accumulated income over 20 years, what is it worth today in Indian rupees? And what is interesting is that the net present cost of electricity supply is a minus. That means it is financial savings for the utility to invest today into solar energy generation. The net present value of the avoided cost here, for example, for this one farm is more than 15 lakhs. And the capital investment required for this intervention is a bit less than 10 lakhs. So from a financial point of view, investment makes absolute sense as of today. This is just the carbon emissions that could be avoided for this sample farm by scenario. So in the last scenario, it's a little bit more than 590 tons of CO2 emissions over 20 years. Now this is the gain for the farmer. So there is no gain for the farmer if we continue as today. with supply from the grid. There is gain for the farmer as soon as we start introducing advanced irrigation technology because the income increases. So there's a gain for the farmer here. There's gain for the farmer here when we do grid energy efficiency and advanced irrigation. But the highest gain for the farmer is in the last scenario, where in Indian rupees it would be about a 50,000 rupees increase in income per year for the farmer. Now I've done the same for the statewide application. So assuming now all of the farms would go for that one, and we have 20 lakh of agricultural pumps connected today. So what would happen, and I have taken slightly different figures in this case. I have taken an increase in crop yield. Instead of a 50%, I took a 40%. Now, and again, I focus on here. So what was in for the utility is more than 170% of savings. What is in for the farmer is an increase of income by about 42%. This is an energy balance over 20 years. So the question is, what is the solar energy generated? What is the consumption on the farm? What is the solar energy that is exported and can be supplied somewhere else? And what is the avoided energy demand on account of energy efficiency and advanced irrigation technology? So again, I don't go into the detailed numbers. What is interesting again is the last case, which is the most promising one. We have substantial avoided energy demand in million units. We have substantial reduction in energy consumption from the farmers if you compare it with the other black bars here. We have the solar energy production, which is stable in each case, but the energy export is higher for the last scenario because we do both energy efficiency and advanced irrigation. Now in this scenario, for all the 2.1 million farms, it would require a solar PV capacity of about 11,000 megawatt. And the assumption here is based on tether that based on the pump size, we calculate the solar PV capacity requirement by a factor of 3. So meaning if I have a 5 HP pump, tether is proposing to install a 15 kilowatt of solar. Financials, so I think this one is more exciting. So then I've calculated what would be the number of jobs that could be created in case the state government goes for all the farms, for all the scenarios. And there's something called full-time job employment, which is basically a job year per person, FTE. Now, solar could create about 3 lakhs full-time jobs if we were to go large scale for the entire state. The energy efficient pumps would create about 13,000 jobs. Interestingly, and this is based on a data by chain irrigation on job creation for micro irrigation, this would create about 1.7 crore full-time employment if we do large scale application of micro irrigation and advanced irrigation. So the total employment generation potential is about 1.78 crores. Investment required is in crores. This is 1.2 lakh crores of investment. And this is basically the investment per job creation potential, the last one. And you can see that the cheapest way to produce jobs is in energy efficiency, followed by solar, and finally by the smart irrigation. All right, I hope that was not too many numbers.
This was for Tamil Nadu.
This was only for Tamil Nadu, yeah.
While fixing the income increase,
Yeah.
what kind of variables you are taking into consideration?
So the main variable I've taken is if I apply precision irrigation or micro irrigation, there is an increase in crop yield. And the crop yield increases slightly differently by crop. So for the banana, I have taken a 50%, which is based on some research that has been done. For the state itself, I've taken an average of 40%. So by increasing the crop yield per hectare, I have assumed the same increase in income to the farmer. I have factored another thing in, which is a decrease in input costs. So it's assumed that I need 10% less labor and fertilizer input costs by using automated irrigation.
Income also you should consider, this is correct, the yield is increasing, at the same time the price at the particular point of junction, that is very vital.
Yeah.
You take a tomato, you are telling about banana.
Yeah.
And sometimes during the Ogi Poil in my own state, the banana was just 10 paise per piece. Now it is 5 rupees.
Yeah.
So therefore the income varies.
Sure.
Income totally depends upon not only the yield. Yield will be very, very high. But the price, marketing capacity, infrastructure facilities, things of that should be also considered for arriving in such kind of things.
Sure.
That is very practical.
Yeah, no, I agree. I didn't consider that for two reasons, because the price will vary regardless of whether I use this technology or not, isn't it? So then, regardless of that. And I didn't consider what is the future price of bananas and the market development. I have just assumed an increase of 5% every year in the cost or the income by crop, to take some inflation into account. But I didn't go into the market dynamics and everything else, because that will be the same regardless of whether I use precision irrigation or not. So the percentage increase will be the same. The total increase in terms of rupee values will certainly vary on the market price.
When you are giving a good picture, it is essential to consider all these factors too. That's what my concern is.
Sure.
That's very, very vital. Otherwise, even the government authorities or the planning people may feel it's a very amazing picture. We have to see the other side also. While seeing other side only, you will understand the realities. Now you are telling about nearly 1 crore employment can be created. Well, very good. But per employment is 154 rupees, right? 154 rupees?
No. This is,
The last column.
yeah, this is per crore. So the total, you see, this is full-time per Indian crore. So we get 154 full-time employments by 1 crore investment. Yeah, 1 crore Indian rupees.
You mentioned about some interventions.
Yeah.
So can you elaborate on that?
Interventions in?
Yeah. In the previous slides, while arriving at those figures,
Yeah.
you mentioned about some interventions. With some interventions, you came up with those improvements. So
In irrigation or?
yeah, I mean,
Do you remember the slide?
I think it was one. In that savings, I think it was
In savings, all right.
Was it the savings or the gain for the farmers?
Yeah.
You said you arrived at those figures with with some interventions.
Okay, okay.
Increase in productivity.
Yeah, so they, when I,
Productivity, you said based on some
yeah.
Interventions.
So the income increase in farmer has primarily 3 components. One is increase in yield. The second one is if I install solar, the farmer will lose a little bit of productive land. So we have deducted this one. So there will be, let's say I install a 50 kilowatt of solar and I need roughly 100 square meters of land. So that means the farmer will have no income on crop production of this land. So that has been deducted. The last one that affects in this calculation the income of the farmer is the input required on fertilizer and labor cost has been assumed to reduce by 10%. So that's the 3 factors. Now what is on top of it is if the farmer reduces the energy consumption, he will export more solar energy net to the grid. That means his revenue will increase by reducing his consumption. There's a dynamic between that. So if the farmer reduces his consumption, he will have more income from solar. So that's basically the reason why the income goes up as soon as there is, for example, solar and energy efficiency, because this income from solar it gets higher. But in this case, the income from solar is marginal. The income from crop increase in percentage, maybe not in total number, is the more interesting one. And the impact on the water, because by reducing 45% less water, and the electricity on farm is only used for water pumping. So I reduce 45% of electricity consumption, but I also reduce 45% of water consumption. Which may then enable the farmer either to have a second crop because he has water left, yeah, or expand his field, you know, or just keep on what he does, but the groundwater table goes up. There's multiple scenarios that may happen afterwards. I know that there's a lot of reservations in providing the farmer with reliable power because there is a fear that water extraction gets even worse than today. And there's different opinions, and I don't have any on that. I think it needs to be tested. Some think actually it will go down because the farmer finally has reliable power and they can pump water whenever it's required. Because today it's just pumping all the time when there's power coming. And other people are of the opinion that the water extraction will go up. But I haven't seen anybody doing a serious study on it. So right now it's opinions.
IRMA in Gujarat has done some serious study about this actually.
Yeah.
How solar power itself becomes a crop.
Yeah, I've been to that one. I've seen that, yes, and it's one of the pilots, and it's a cooperation with farmers. But they do not do energy efficiency and they don't do advanced irrigation. But the farmer can net export solar energy to the grid and they get paid for it.
I think that's the model Delhi is trying to get in.
That's the model the MNRE is right now promoting, and all the states are asked to adopt it to their specific context. And Tamil Nadu has basically adopted what I have presented. Tamil Nadu would team up with a RESCO. So a RESCO, somebody else would do the investment. The RESCO get paid for the unit of solar energy produced, and the farmer would get a financial incentive from the state to allow solar production to happen on the farm and to allow metering.
How do you reach the farmers by the Farmers Federation or Agricultural Ministry?
Yeah.
So that the power can be saved and used for another.
Well, I guess the implementation model in this case is very challenging because it's farm by farm. So I know some states, they work on agricultural feeder level, where it's much faster to roll it out. I think the benefit here is the farmer is more involved. There is an incentive for the farmer and metering can happen. How it will be implemented, right now the government has requested for proposals. They have floated a request for proposals right now, I think for 1,000 systems. And maybe finally, you know, there is something like called FPOs. There's aggregators. It could be that the government wants to work with the FPOs. Maybe the government works with sugar mills that aggregate thousands of farmers in order to get to the farmers finally. Cotton farmers, yeah. Yeah. What I haven't calculated also is, just to close, the water savings because we are not using conventional energy, which was the discussion earlier.